Salutare, salutare, ne uităm împreună la Brian Berletic, așa se numește dânsul, da, este pe canalul The New Atlas. Ne uităm la ultimele evenimente care au avut loc în lumea asta, parcă din ce în ce mai tristă. Ok, hai să-i dăm cuvântul.
I just want to show you this. This is from ABC News. This is Australia
Hei, surse
News.
de încredere occidentale.
And what you see on the screen is actually a Ukrainian Bayraktar TB2 drone flying over Kiev.
Deci ne uităm la un avion fără pilot, aparținând forțelor armate ucrainene. Ok? Știți, celebra dronă, hai să-i spunem pe scurt, dronă de fabricație turcească, care zboară deasupra Kievului.
Air defense downed it. And you can see eventually the
culmilor, tocmai apărarea antiaeriană ucraineană doboară drona ucraineană. Așa ceva? Adică acolo sunt niște scule costisitoare, drona aia este foarte scumpă și nici racheta cu care au dat-o jos nu este tocmai ieftină. Și nici nu prea din abundență rachete antiaeriene.
Air defense missile. Ukraine does not have air defense missiles to spare. The fact that they're using air defense missiles on their own drone is a very puzzling development. Ukraine claims that they lost contact with the drone, which is what prompted them to down it. They downed it in the middle of the city. So I think it's probably more than just having lost.
Îl întrerup puțin, exact. Ok, au pierdut controlul asupra dronei. Băi, de ce n-au lăsat-o să se ducă în derivă și să o doboare mai încolo? De ce tocmai deasupra orașului și nu a oricărui oraș, ci asupra capitalei Kiev?
Control of it. Why wouldn't you just allow it?
Eu am înțeles că regimul de la Kiev nu a devenit celebru prin grija față de viața propriilor cetățeni, dar totuși e de neînțeles.
Continue flying until it's in a less populated area and then down it. So maybe Russia and its electronic warfare gained control over it. Maybe that is a possibility. At first,
deci, din ce înțeleg eu, există posibilitatea, dar accentul se pune pe acel maybe, ca rușii să fi preluat controlul dronei ucrainene și acum le era frică eroilor ca nu cumva să fie ghidată undeva în curte la Zelensky sau ceva.
And I just want to point out what has been going on with the Western media and its coverage of this conflict. At first, the Western media was suggesting that it was a Russian drone just aimlessly flying over Kiev in the middle of the day, and that it was downed, and it was supposed to be Ukraine attempted to attack the Kremlin and created fear and insecurity in Moscow, and now Russia tried to do the same over Kiev, and yet we just shot it down.
Ca la grădiniță. Voi ne-ați trimis o dronă deasupra Kremlinului, că vă trimitem și noi o dronă deasupra Kievului.
And it turned out that it was actually their own drone, and it was actually the Ukrainian Air Force that admitted it. It was very clearly a Bayraktar TB2 drone. Speaking of Ukraine downing various types of targets over.
Deci să ne înțelegem, tipul ăsta de drone este folosit doar de armata ucraineană, în sensul că nu este folosit și de cea rusă.
Ukraine. We have been hearing news about Ukraine allegedly downing a Russian hypersonic Kinzhal missile. And if you look at the news, do a Google News search, Ukraine hypersonic missile, Ukraine down.
Stop, mă dau la o parte ca să vedeți cum este acoperită această știre de presa occidentală.
Russian hypersonic missile with US Patriot system. Al Jazeera, CNBC, CNN, The Washington Post,
CNBC,
The Business
CNN,
Insider,
The Washington
NPR,
Post,
The Washington Post, DW, all of them are reporting this. Every single one of them are reporting this, and yet this is another case where the Ukrainian Air Force itself has admitted that this never happened. This did not happen. So I want to take a look at this article first from the New Voice.
Hai să ne uităm. Deci, The New Voice of Ukraine, nu știu cum vă sună vouă, dar mie mi se pare o publicație pro-ucraineană în care se spune că forțele aeriene ucrainene neagă poveștile cu doborârea unei rachete hipersonice deasupra Kievului. Nu există așa ceva, este totul foarte clar direct din titlu. Ok, și aici vedem și poza dubioasă, da, care a fost lansată inițial.
Of Ukraine, this is very clearly a pro-Ukrainian media platform, and it says Ukrainian Air Force denies reports Kinjal hypersonic ballistic missile downed over Kiev. And this is an article that must have been very reluctantly written, and yet they wrote it anyway. And the Western media is going to continue claiming that this is a Kinjal missile.
Da, ca așa se întâmplă treburile. Ok? Vine fake news-ul, repede, toate trompetele occidentale preiau știrea, o răspândesc, se bucură lăcustare, gata frate, era hipersonicelor rusești a apus, au eroi ac de cojocul hipersonicelor Kinjal. După care vine dezmințirea, dar dezmințirea nu mai este preluată de presa occidentală sau este preluată la capitolul și altele, scris mărunt ceva și în fine în memoria colectivă rămâne imprimat faptul că eroii de la Kiev au ac de cojocul hipersonicelor rusești. Asta este tot.
It says reports that a Russian Kinjal hypersonic air-launched ballistic missile strike was downed over Kiev during the night of May 4th are false, the spokesperson for the Air Force Command said on May 5th. There was a possibility of the use of ballistic missiles, but none were detected, they said in a comment to Ukrainian broadcaster Suspilny on May 5th. He also noted that some military officials have already received reprimands for spreading false information that the
Asta e, și s-au dus, a zburat puiul cu ață.
active Western media is more than happy to spread. And I wondered, is there any, even just one report in the Western media that is going to mention that the spokesperson for the Ukrainian Air Force has denied this? And it turns out, yes, there is. This is from Newsweek. And look at the headline here. Did Ukraine down Russia's unbeatable hypersonic Kinjal missile? Question mark. Is this really a question? Because if you go...
Nu este nicio întrebare, au spus cu subiect și predicat. Nu am doborât o rachetă Kinjal.
Down in the article, this is what it actually says.
Ukrainian
Air Force spokesman Yuri Ignat said in a statement, I have already refuted 1,000 times. You should have seen it yesterday. There was a possibility of using ballistic missiles, but no ballistic missiles were recorded. A Ukrainian Telegram channel reporting on Ignat's statement clarified that the Air Command does not confirm the media reports about the downing of the Kinjal missile over Kiev. The channel added that the news media outlets that had suggested that have been reproached as Russia is using their information in the war against Ukraine. So why is there a question in Newsweek's headline when there is such a definitive and
Păi de ce să lăsăm adevărul să ne strice o manipulare frumoasă? Uite, am găsit răspuns la întrebarea lui Brian.
Exclusive denial from the Ukrainian Air Force. Why? Because the Western media does not want to admit that it was misinforming its readers. They want that propaganda, which is politically expedient, to continue filtering out into the public even after it's been denied. So people need to keep this in mind when reading the Western media, if they don't know already, that this is how the Western media operates. It's about advancing a geopolitical agenda, not informing people of the facts, even facts.
Adică mai pe scurt, fac propagandă, nu fac jurnalism.
That have been laid out by Ukraine itself. They're still not going to report it in an honest manner because it's politically inconvenient. Now, I'm talking about the fighting on the ground in Ukraine. I mentioned the fighting continues in Bakhmut. There's only a handful of blocks left held by Ukrainian forces. This fighting is taking place. Russian private military company Wagner is doing most of this fighting. And we've heard this news about Wagner's head, Prigozhin. And he came out in a video recently a very emotional video where he was condemning the Russian Ministry of Defense,
Nu doar emoțional, ci chiar horror.
condemning them for not sending enough ammunition, accusing various specific members of the Ministry of Defense.
Dacă am înțeles bine, îi certa că nu trimis suficientă muniție pentru artilerie.
Treason, and he did this all with dead bodies of Wagner fighters in the backgrounds. And there's a lot of speculation going on about why this video was made. What is Prigozhin doing? Is this some sort of psychological operation? Is this Prigozhin losing his mind? Is this frustration on Prigozhin's part and a cynical stunt to attempt to fulfill his ambitions? I'm going to lay out three possibilities. We don't know yet. We can only speculate. These are three possibilities to keep in mind as evidence emerges. We can figure out which one is the most plausible. So I'll start with Prigozhin and his ambitions. Maybe he wanted to take all of Bakhmut. He wanted himself and his private military company, Wagner, to take the city of Bakhmut, perhaps by a certain date, say sometime before May 9th, Russian Victory Day. He wanted to get credit for doing this. The Ministry of Defense was giving him enough ammunition to grind down Ukrainian forces in and around Bakhmut, but maybe not enough to conduct the offensive he wanted to conduct, to seize the city.
Nu infracțiunea, ofensiva pe care a vrut să o facă. Ok, dacă tot a luat-o subtitrarea razna, hai că lămuresc eu pe scurt. El, Prigozhin, poate că, da, suntem la ipoteza 1, voia să ia foarte rapid Bakhmutul, să-și asume și creditul, da, să spună, băi, datorită mie s-a întâmplat această victorie, ok, numai că oficialii de la Moscova îi trimiteau muniție doar pentru un război de uzură, nu și pentru un asalt în forță. Da? Și ăsta încerca asaltul în forță cu muniție mai, da, calibrată pentru un război de uzură.
And take all of that glory for himself and his private military company. I mean, I have talked at length about the difference between a war of attrition and a war of territorial conquest, and how much more expensive it is in terms of lives and equipment and ammunition, that when you're trying to take territory from a peer or near peer enemy, there is a very high cost involved, and you have to be very prepared to pay that cost.
Deci dacă te repezi, ok, s-ar putea, dacă dai rush, cum s-ar spune în termen de gameri, ok, s-ar putea să pierzi multe vieți omenești. De altfel, dacă ați observat și contraofensivele astea ucrainene atunci când au loc, că pe asta de primăvară o tot așteptăm, așa, sunt făcute exact în stilul ăsta, da? La repezeală pentru a cuceri teritorii. Sunt mai spectaculoase, produc titlul de presă. Rușii se pare că au o altă strategie, război de uzură. Să lăsăm tunurile să vorbească și să ne protejăm oamenii.
And you cannot do that with the ammunition and equipment given to you for fighting instead a war of attrition. They are two completely different ways of approaching modern warfare. And so that is one possibility. Prigozhin wanted to fight it one way. The Ministry of Defense decided already that it would be fought another way. The resources allocated for Wagner is for a war of attrition, while Prigozhin is encouraging his forces to take territory.
Da.
So that's one possibility.
Posibilitatea una a
he made
fost
this video trying to stir up public support, maybe to get behind him, to undermine the position of those in the Ministry of Defense. And
da, pentru a le forța mâna să îi dea mai multă muniție, să poate să o ia la fugă pe acolo prin Bakhmut, da, să-i fugărească pe eroi.
Them into giving him the equipment and the ammunition he needs to conduct this campaign in the way he wants to. The second possibility, and this was laid out very well by Alex and Alexander of the Duran. Again, they do excellent work every single day. They pointed out that Prigozhin is not a military man. He's not a trained Russian military officer does not have the discipline and, more importantly, the conditioning of a military officer. People underestimate, people who have not been in the military may underestimate the type of brotherhood that develops between you and other soldiers on the battlefield or even just during training. I was never in combat, but you develop a very close relationship with the people.
Brian vorbește acum din experiență proprie. Atenție!
Around you when you're doing very difficult work out in the field under difficult conditions. There's a lot of teamwork involved. That teamwork develops into a sort of brotherhood. And imagine under combat conditions.
Deci ideea e că Brian a fost și el în armata americană.
Watching these men die around you, people you're very close to, connected with, that is going to get at you emotionally. Military officer training is supposed to desensitize you to that. It's supposed to give you the discipline and the military bearing required to overcome those emotions and continue focusing on strategic decision making.
Deci de asta m-am repezit înainte cu antrenamentul. Exact. Antrenamentul are și componenta asta să te aducă mereu pe calea rațională, mai ales că în focul bătăliei ești predispus să fii emotiv, da? Să dai frâu liber emoțiilor. Camaradul meu a căzut acolo.
It seems maybe he's being overwhelmed by emotions, and this is just him at his limits, and this is him and maybe Wagner tactically and strategically needing to take a break and needing to go refit. That is the second possibility as to why he would have made a video like this.
Da, deci asta a fost ipoteza 2, lipsa de antrenament militar și nervi întinși la maximum. Hei, totuși, în ce condiții trăiește omul ăla acolo, au dus la un videoclip făcut practic la nervi.
Take everything very personal, and even matters that are just the reality of warfare, he will attempt to find someone to blame for them, taking it very personally. And number 3, there's the possibility that this could be a psychological operation. I've heard.
Deci, ipoteza 3, o operațiune psihologică de derutare a inamicului.
This theory put out by various people. I had Mark Sloboda on the live stream on Friday. He was talking about this possibility. You have the overall Russian military. These military units are led by commanders who are very professional. When they have issues with the Ministry of Defense, they will resolve them privately and professionally. And if you wanted to feign weakness and you wanted a military commander to do something like this very publicly, it would be implausible to have one of your standard military units do this. Wagner is not a standard Russian military unit. Prigozhin is not a standard military commander. So there is the possibility to use this unique military organization for some sort of psychological operation to feign weakness.
Și atenție, pe lângă cele expuse mai devreme, Prigozhin mai are ceva, mai are audiență, da? Când vorbește, lumea se uită la el că îl știu că este o figură.
In a very public and visible way to perhaps draw in Ukrainian forces to maybe accelerate their timetable for their offensive in the Donbas region.
Deci să le întindă o capcană. Deci să-i facă să se repeadă, să grăbească contraofensiva.
Rotation on May 10th. Wagner said they're done. On May 10th, they're going to hand over control of Bakhmut to another Russian military unit. That would be the time to attack. And it is a strategic blunder to publicly announce when you're going to do a troop rotation.
Da. Adică, noi ne rotim trupele pe 10 mai. Suntem în degringoladă. Noi plecăm, vin probabil cecenii și atunci comandanții ucraineni, comandamentul ucrainean, ar putea fi tentat, hai să ne repezim atunci pe ei. Ok?
So one wonders why Prigozhin would have done this. Perhaps deliberately as part of a psychological operation. I tend to give more wait to number two. That Prigozhin is not a military man, and the stress of being there on the ground with those troops is taking its toll, and that he and his organization need to take a break and refit. I tend to gravitate toward that option, but only time will tell for sure, so just keep these possibilities in mind. As evidence emerges, we can figure out which one was the most plausible explanation.
Da. Deci, opțiunea numărul 2 este și cea mai simplă și de obicei explicația cea mai simplă este și cea mai corectă. Omul a cedat cu nervi. Înțeleg că acum și-a revenit.
We are still waiting for Ukraine to launch its offensive. And I've talked about how no matter how successful or unsuccessful the Ukrainian offensive may be, they're going to lose a huge number of troops and equipment launching it. They are attempting to breach defenses that Russia has prepared for months now. And the number of Ukrainian troops versus the number of Russian troops along the line of contact does not favor Ukraine, nor does the amount of equipment and ammunition. Ukraine is going to attempt to concentrate what forces it does.
Da, nu știm dacă va putea Ucraina să aibă avantajul de 3-1 ca număr de trupe, da, că atunci când ești în ofensivă.
In just a few points along the line of contact and attempt to overwhelm Russian forces locally.
Da, nu va împinge tot frontul, ci va încerca niște străpungeri.
Doing so, and no matter where they end up stopping on the map, at the end of this, NATO does not have the ability to replenish their forces or to retrain a significant number of troops. As a matter of fact, they were unable to prepare an army of sufficient size for this particular offensive. They will be less able to do it again.
Și tot mai puțin capabil. Da? Și acum, părerea personală. Băi, dacă ai forță militară, pur și simplu îți vezi de treabă, da? Poți eventual împinge frontul, efectiv, ai superioritate numerică, superioritate de pregătire tactică, superioritate de armament. Nu trebuie să te bazezi pe contraofensive. Aventurile astea, cum să le spun eu, cumva sunt specifice regimurilor care știu că pierd războiul. Și nu cu multe zeci de ani în urmă, istoria chiar asta ne-a arătat. Nu era și acel dictator german, tot așa numai contraofensiva în cap? Și unde l-au dus contraofensivele? Spuneți voi.
Where there's a cycle where NATO builds up Ukrainian forces, they do their offensive, and then NATO rebuilds Ukrainian forces, and they just keep doing that over and over perpetually. That is not the case. This is a war of attrition that Ukraine and NATO are losing, and each iteration of this process, Ukraine and NATO become weaker. They're less able to replace things like air defense, artillery, ammunition, and artillery pieces, main battle tanks, all of this equipment that Ukraine needs, but is not able to get in the numbers it needs to match or exceed Russian military capabilities.
Și ca fapt divers așa, știți când a fost cea mai capabilă Ucraina din punct de vedere militar? Da, exact, în ziua în care Putin a declanșat operațiunea militară specială pe 24 februarie 2022. De atunci restul sunt cârpele. Atunci avea armată odihnită, avea armată antrenată, dar nu la cursuri de-astea rapide, ba chiar armata aia antrenată avea și experiență de luptă, că știți, își regla mâna pe acolo prin Donbass, da? Și timp de 8 ani a făcut chestia asta. Acum, cu oamenii fugăriți pe stradă, băgați cu deasila în armată, cu tot felul de arme, în toate felurile cu care bieții ucraineni nu sunt familiarizați pe deplin, da? Asta e.
The point at which Ukraine's military was largest and best trained was when the Russian special military operation began in February 2022. NATO had built this army up over the course of 8 years. They trained Ukrainian soldiers over a full training course. They did not shorten or abbreviate training. And then these soldiers were able to get years of experience from 2014 to 2022 on the front line in the Donbas region, build up their experience. And then in terms of military equipment, when they were transferring javelins or Turkey was transferring Bayraktar TB2 drones to Ukraine,
nu curcanul, ci Turcia și tot așa.
they spent
Înțelegeți voi,
years
da?
properly integrating that into Ukraine's way of fighting in combat.
Și da,
At the beginning of
evident
this,
și armele astea, asta ne spune, nu trebuie doar să le ai să fii priceput cu ele, ci să le integrezi în armată, da? Că luptele nu sunt fiecare cu arma lui și de capul lui, ci trebuie toate integrate să funcționeze armonios împreună.
special military operation, Ukraine had over 1,000 artillery pieces and multiple launch rocket systems. They had over 1,000 main battle tanks.
1000 de tank.
For this upcoming offensive, NATO has furbished
Bine, aveau vreo 1900, dar 1000 erau gata, da? De pornit. La sfert de cheie porneau.
And with 230 tanks, a lot of them being Soviet era tanks.
Au mai și primit tancuri sovietice.
Do you see what the problem is? They have about 200 to 300 artillery pieces now versus 1,000 when the special military operation began. NATO is simply incapable of furbishing Ukraine with the amount of weapons and ammunition that it needs. They cannot even match or exceed what Ukraine had in February 2022.
Auzi ce expresie, armata refurbished. Doamne ferește.
When this phase of this conflict began.
Armata peticită de NATO.
It's very important to keep that in mind when considering this particular offensive and then the aftermath, what the US and the rest of NATO is going to do to try to replace the losses Ukraine will inevitably suffer. Now again, this is a point that Alexander Mercouris has made. He pointed this out first. Again, this is a TASS article. It says, Ukraine to have no forces left to resist Russia after a counteroffensive, Russian commander. That sounds very similar to what I have been saying for weeks, if not months now. They're talking about Abdi Aludinov of the Akhmat Special Forces Commando Unit and aide to Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov. And this is what the article says. We have long been aware that the enemy is preparing these forces and materiel. I believe that what they have amassed for the so-called counteroffensive represents the very last dribs and drabs of manpower that Ukraine can field. At the end of the day, after we grind this
ultima zvâgnire înainte de pierderea luptei.
Counteroffensive of theirs down, I think that they will have no one left to call up and send off to do battle with us. We will gradually move forward then, Aludinov pointed out. He added that Russian forces had no need to make any breakthroughs and send troops off to die. We are slowly and steadily doing our job. And this goes back to what I have been saying for months now.
Războiul de
that Russia is not going to launch any sort of big arrow offensive. They never said that they would. They're not going to. It's extremely costly. It's a huge investment when they have the advantage in long-range firepower and in terms of ammunition supply to fight a
Ideea dacă ai tunuri, unde te grăbești? A?
more incremental and more conservative way. They would conserve their manpower, taking out a huge toll on the enemy. That's what they have been doing, and that's what they say they will continue to do. And I've been saying this for months because that's what Russian commanders have been saying for months. So this is also from TASS.
Da? Și încă o observație. Atunci când ai un raport al pierderilor în favoarea ta de 8-1, în sensul că pentru a ucide un soldat rus trebuie sacrificați 8 soldați ucraineni, vă dați seama că Rusia nu vrea să facă nimic ca să schimbe această stare de fapt care este, repet, în favoarea ei. Ia, uitați-vă.
This is from October last year. Russian troops persistently grinding down enemy forces in Ukraine, Operation Commander. And this article says Russian troops do not seek a high pace of advance. in the special military operation in Ukraine and are persistently grinding down enemy forces. Commander of the Integrated Group of Forces in Ukraine, Army General Sergei Sorovikin, said on Tuesday, "We have a different strategy. It was highlighted by the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. We do not seek high rates of advance. We spare each soldier and are persistently grinding down the advancing enemy," the general told reporters. This is what they said last October, and then that's what they proceeded to do. It wasn't as if they launched an offensive, it failed, and this was the explanation they used to explain it. This is what they said after
Au spus-o când erau și ucraineni în contraofensivă, mă rog, ofensivă, sau oricum, cred că ea deja se cam epuizase.
Ukrainian fall offensive last year, as General Sorovikin was stabilizing the line of contact, he said, "We're going to grind down Ukrainian troops," and that's what they did in Bakhmut especially. That is what they have been doing. They had no intention of launching a winter offensive. The goal was to just put as much pressure along the line of contact as possible to strain and break Ukrainian forces where they could and to draw as many forces in and destroy them as possible. That is what they have done.
Ceea ce au făcut în special la Bakhmut și la Avdiivka, da?
That's what they are now saying they will continue doing. Russia has an overabundance of long-range artillery, rockets, missiles, and their entire military aviation at their disposal
Neatinsă.
to fight this long-range conservative
A spus întreaga aviație militară, în sensul că aviația militară a Federației Ruse nu a fost ciobită de forțele ucrainene.
Ukraine does not. They don't have this ability. They don't have the weapon systems and the quantities needed or the ammunition in the quantity necessary to match or exceed Russian capabilities. They have no choice but to send large numbers of troops and machines into Russian defenses, hoping to overwhelm them and compelling Russia to withdraw. That is the only way they are going to take territory on the battlefield, and they are obsessed with that because they are so incapable of fighting a war of attrition and matching the military-industrial output of the Russian Federation. Now, speaking of long-range weapons, and specifically weapons used by Ukraine, let's talk about HIMARS, and this is coming from CNN.
Da, deci HIMARS, nu Marte înalt, cum traduce robotul Google, mă rog, YouTube.
Russia's jamming of US-provided rocket systems complicates Ukraine's war efforts.
Interesant.
The article says Russia has been thwarting US-made mobile rocket systems in Ukraine more frequently in recent months, using electronic jammers to throw off its GPS-guided targeting system to cause rockets to miss their targets. Multiple people briefed on the matter told CNN. In recent months, the systems have been rendered increasingly less effective by the Russia's intensive blocking, 5 U.S., British, and Ukrainian sources tell CNN, forcing U.S. and Ukrainian officials to find ways to tweak the HIMARS' software to counter the evolving Russian jamming efforts. It is a constant cat-and-mouse game of finding a countermeasure to the jamming, a Pentagon official said, only to then have the Russians counteract that countermeasure. And it's not clear how sustainable that game is.
De altfel, probabil că ați observat că s-au rărit știrile cu ce a mai făcut HIMARS-ul pe acolo prin Ucraina. Gata, tăcere, nu prea mai face nimic.
Long term, just like everything else, it is very unsustainable.
Au găsit rușii, se pare, antidotul.
And this is another thing that I had been talking about for months. Actually, as soon as they announced the HIMARS were being sent, I pointed out that they would not be sent in the numbers necessary
nu sunt suficiente.
To match or exceed similar Russian capabilities like the Tornado S, which actually has a longer range than the HIMARS does at 120 kilometers. They would be intercepted by Russia's formidable anti-air and anti-missile defense systems, and that they would face jamming. And now all three of these problems have been confirmed over the last several months, and now this with the jamming of the GPS signal from CNN. And it's not that the HIMARS is ineffective, it's just that Ukraine never had the amount of time it needed to fully and properly integrate it with the rest of its military. It's not getting them in large enough numbers. The ammunition available to them is not available in the quantity necessary to make any sort of major strategic difference on the battlefield. They are capable of hitting Russian targets far behind the line of contact, but just not in any way that's going to change the tide of the fighting. Now, finally, I want to talk about, I continue talking about this attrition aspect of this conflict and talking not just about advanced weapons that Ukraine does not have enough of, like air defense or multiple launch rocket systems, but basic things like artillery, ammunition. Now, this comes from China Daily, which is obviously not a Western news outlet, but it says EU to ramp up ammunition after agreeing on new plan. I've talked about this before, and this is what they actually are calling the act. The Act in Support of Ammunition Production, or ASAP, proposed by the Commission will be matched with co-financing of around 500 million euros from member states and other sources if they hope to get subsidies from the EU fund. The goal is to produce 1 million rounds
as soon as possible, adică cât mai curând posibil.
Of ammunition within a year, not this year, not next year, a year. And 1 million rounds equates to about 2,700 rounds per day, which isn't even half of what Ukraine has been firing. And at 6,000 rounds a day, that is several times less than Russia is firing per day, just to put this into context and in proper perspective.
Adică oricât se planifică, oamenii tot nu ajunge, tot nu le ajunge.
The US is working to build up its artillery shell production to something around 90,000 a month. Together with the EU plan, that would get them to around 6,000 rounds per day, but that would still be much less than what Russia has been firing per day. The US is not going to achieve 90,000 rounds per month for years. This will be several years before they're able to achieve this, and it appears this European Union plan, if it even is implemented, that will also take years to achieve this minimum 6,000 rounds per day that Ukraine is currently firing, which is considered inadequate.
Da? Deci, mereu aceleași povești, bă, efectiv, când s-au băgat în afacerea asta, occidentalii, mă rog, NATO, hai să-i spunem cum se numește, băi, n-a planificat absolut nimic, da? Și acum sunt surprinși, aoleo, ce hal de război este acolo, nu ne-am așteptat la așa ceva, n-avem muniție, nu-i nimic, hai că ne apucăm să fabricăm muniție, da? Ok, și cum facem asta? Păi până să ne apucăm să fabricăm muniția, durează până construim fabricile de muniție și tot așa. Și în schimb, în presa lor, tot timpul rușii sunt ăia care n-au de niciunele.
This gives you an idea of just what sort of disadvantage Ukraine and its Western sponsors are at in terms of a war of attrition. I've explained this many times. The US and its allies spent decades fighting these small wars all around the world against
small
non-state actors in some cases, battered, impoverished countries with ancient military equipment in other cases. And
NATO, americanii s-au bătut mereu cu state mici din punct de vedere militar și nu s-au așteptat cum este un război cu Rusia. I-au crezut și pe ăia tot niște desculți, da? Wow. Surprise.
They have not prepared properly to fight against a peer or near peer competitor, which is what they are trying to do now with Russia and also China. Russia was not fighting these small wars all around the globe. They were focusing on building up this specific capability for years, and now it is paying off. The US and its allies are now attempting to expand their military-industrial output. It's going to take years just to match where Russia is right now. Russia will continue expanding its military-industrial output. They have the advantage, and all while this is taking place, Ukraine is preparing to squander the stockpiles, the trained manpower, the weapons and vehicles that they have right now. They're going to squander that in an offensive that is politically motivated solely for serving political optics,
titluri de presă,
media optics, in what is actually a war of attrition. they will be destroying these troops and equipment, expending this ammunition, and then they will be right back to where they started at the end of their fall offensive last year, with Russia still having the entire advantage. So we'll have to keep an eye on this. I will continue keeping an eye on this and how this develops. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do and it helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. In the video description below are also all of the links that I referenced in this video, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel. If an ad pops up, feel free to skip it because it's not doing me any good at all. If you do want to support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. The links to both of those.
Da? Se pare că e o strategie bună. A spus, bă, eu nu mă mai chinui cu monetizarea clipurilor. Probabil a și încercat și a văzut ce se întâmplă. Nu prea acceptă YouTube la genul ăsta de videoclipuri. Nu le plătește, le descurajează. Asta fiind zise, vă aștept și pe voi cu un like. Tot așa verificați și linkurile din descrierea videoclipului meu. Ok, o să pun link și către clipul original. Sper că v-a plăcut de Brian. Poate nu este așa de, cum să spun, ironic hâtru, precum The History Legends, dar le spune direct și fără menajamente, da, pe sistemul câinii latră, caravana trece. El ce are de spus, spune și cu asta basta. Haide, pa, pa!